Welcome to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast for club owners, operators, and fitness professionals. Each week, host Bryan O'Rourke brings you an expert interview with a global influencer at the crossroads of fitness and technology. You gain the insights, tools, and inspiration you need to stay connected to the pulse for what matters most for your business in the age of exponential technologies.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Bryan O'Rourke. It's getting hot down here in Southeast Louisiana in June, and I hope you're going to see me at another hot town here next week in Miami at the URSA event. Look forward to saying hello to you and all my friends. It will be quite a happening, so can't wait to see you there. For today's podcast, which is number 133, we have a panel. And Sunil Saha from, Perkville, a good friend and a member of the Fitness Industry Technology Council, and also a co-founder of Middle, which is an interesting integration platform as a service, suggested this and got us to have some pretty impressive guests on the show. To start off, Amie Boring, who is now the director of marketing technology for 24 Hour Fitness and is one of the leading minds in technology applications in our space at 24. She is joined by Mike Rucker, who, of course, is with Active Wellness. He's also a health tech expert for verywell.com and a very reliable expert on digital and all things digital. And then, of course, Jarron Aizen, who is the CEO founder of Hapana out of New York. It's a next generation studio and club management software platform. Check these folks out. You can see the links to their bios on LinkedIn in the show notes. And our conversation today is around a subject that some of you may know, some of you may not, which is integration platform as a service. Of course, you heard of SaaS, software as a service. But we're talking about tools, an example would be Zapier, that enable different systems to talk to each other in an easier way. And with many club operations dealing with multiple SaaS solutions, multiple cloud applications with data everywhere, to make that data actionable, we've got to coalesce it in tools and share it in a way that takes perhaps less technical knowledge and more practical application of getting you information that you can make actionable. And these guests on this podcast today really get into some of the details around that and what it means. So I think this is a very relevant subject and one I hope that you find of great interest and to be informative. So without further ado, let's welcome Amie, Mike, and Jarron on the podcast. Well, welcome, listeners. I really appreciate you joining us for this interview. As I was mentioning in the introduction, these folks don't need any introduction, but as you know and heard some of their background, I was very delighted to have these individuals who are quite accomplished in our space spend some time talking about a very important topic. And that is something called integration platform as a service, which is a very interesting acronym we'll be getting into. But before we get into that, I want to let each of these panelists kind of say hello. First, Amie Boring from 24. How are you doing this morning, Amie?
Good morning, Bryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here. And then Jarron, of course, we have Jarron from New York City with Hapana. How are you doing this morning, my friend?
Hey, Bryan, great to be on the show.
And then, of course, Mike, Rucker, Mike, you're not just working with your team. I mean, you're doing the verywell.com stuff. You're doing a lot of things. It's a pleasure to have you here as well. Thanks for making time, Mike.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So, this is a very interesting topic. Because, of course, how to take advantage of these integration platforms to make things better in the worlds that you all work in. Because, as you well know, a lot of organizations are running 10, 15, 20 SaaS applications or more as part of their businesses today. And I know all of you are well familiar with this kind of challenge and opportunity that exists around the concept of iPaaS. So without giving anything away confidentially, and I direct this to you first, Amie, tell us generally how you're using integration technology at 24 in your role.
Sure, Brian. Yeah, we're doing it in a couple different ways, actually. So we run the gamut from sort of do-it-yourself integrations that have developed over time and necessity, using tools to move data around, all the way to using an iPaaS solution like Middle from Perkville. So for our company, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but absolutely, as you mentioned, it's critical. The customer is expecting, as an operator, our customers are making an agreement with us to share a lot of first-party information in exchange, right? They've made a cost-benefit analysis that they'll tell us things about themselves so that we can help them with their success. And they expect us to use that to help them on their fitness journey. So it's, and they really don't care about the complexities. They expect in their interactions with us that we know how recently they've worked out, what their goals are. And so it is absolutely critical. It's also challenging, and we're doing it in a number of ways.
Mike, you're nodding and smiling as we're listening to Amie. What do you think?
Yeah, so active wellness is a little bit unique that we have. We're a management company, so we have a host of different clients that we serve with different business models. And I think where it's been important to us is allowing us to be agile with regards to these integration services really being the backbone. And so the reason I was nodding and smiling was, ours were homegrown at first as well, because, Zapier's been out for a while, but a lot of us weren't using it. Now there's, newer players like Middle, but, only 5-8 years ago, a lot of us were creating this sort of middleware, as it's called, ourselves. And so a lot of mine was piecemeal, really trying to coalesce a lot of different technologies to try and provide unique solutions to our clients. And now that the market's matured a little bit, obviously there's more interesting solutions out there that allow us to do that much easier. And so we're, trying to, through an IPASS system, trying to have a single source of truth with regards to integration, not just data. But all that said is that it does allow us to be, handpick different solutions, different vendors, even vendors from outside of our industry, and create pretty unique solutions depending on the client's needs.
Absolutely. And Jarron, in your role, I'm sure you're seeing this quite a bit as well and helping some of your clients. Tell us what you see out there in the market regarding this, and what are the, how are you using it yourself?
Bryan, we've had so many debates internally around how to structure these middleware applications across our group, because we have sort of two main purposes as a membership management suite and solution. The first is, how do we move data between our internal applications? In most cases, it's our own internal systems that we're using to do that. Yep. And then we have customers of ours who use third-party applications, and right now we have an integration to Zapier, and if they want to plug and play, they can do it that way. But what we're trying to do is also do a lot of the heavy lifting for our customers, so that they don't necessarily have to go and think about piecing all of these intricate APIs and systems together. And so that's where these iPaaS systems come into play for us, because it's allowed us to not necessarily go and do a direct integration with all of these independent third-party providers, but have a really strong middleware that has logging functionality as well as other capabilities in terms of logic layers to allow us to always stay up to date with the ever-changing APIs of these third parties. And so it really is an enabler for us to take a lot of that heavy lifting away from our customers having to do it themselves.
Yes. And for listeners that may not know some of the details, I'll give a few very simple examples just so they understand. So, Mike, you mentioned Zapier, right? So some firms that, and we have 14 operating companies across the space, some firms use Zapier to automatically update audiences for Google for your different, data around that to optimize your ad sets, et cetera, around audiences. That's one example. Or we'll use a middleware called Breadwinner for some of our financial systems into Salesforce and different things like that. So what the idea conceptually is that you have all these different applications and you want to make it easier to get things done and have what Mike talked about as some single source of truth where you're not having to go to one platform to get some data, another platform to get other data in different places. And that gets very tricky, especially as you get larger, to actually perform that. And I think this is just a giant area for a lot of folks out there today, which they have all these things running, but they haven't been able to piece it together in a way that makes it easier. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And, at 24-Hour Fitness, we're operating on a pretty large scale.
Yep.
But in a previous role, when I was the director of IT for BFit gyms, right, we just had 7 locations, an HVLP startup. And even then, we were using a member management system, MotionSoft, a lead management system, MindBody for class schedules. And so I would say too, for the providers, right, that was a really important consideration factor on how easy it would be to integrate. And the capabilities, for example, that we were able to leverage MotionSoft with the APIs, the SQSQs, the data extracts, we were able to bring all of that data in. And to Mike's point, that data platform is so critical, but it takes time. And a lot of times there's urgency to implement something and to meet the immediate objective. Check that box, good, whatever that program is, it's up and running. Now we're creating some more data. Okay, well, actually, we need to bring that in so that we can activate it somewhere else so that we can report on it, analyze it, attribute it to the customer journey where appropriate. And that's sort of a follow-on piece. That's all I feel like we're often playing catch up in that area.
Yeah.
And I think to add to Amy's, and I'm sure she can commiserate with me as well, we're fortunate. I guess there's always pros and cons to everything, but with the immense amount of M&A in, the last 4 years, you don't have all of these homegrown technology vendors. But again, half a decade ago, you would have to create so much tech that, to be able to integrate with these folks. And so one of the things that advances on both sides of the fence with things like Middle is that it's not my burden now to deal with that tech that if an API breaks, it's not my neck that gets choked, right? I can, and it's not my responsibility anymore. I can refocus myself on building, the best tech stack instead of worrying about an API breaking.
Yep, that when you say agility, that's kind of what you mean. It gets a lot easier to do what you have to do without the burden of everything that goes on behind it. So with respect to that, how do you all see this integration platform as a service dynamic impacting the fitness industry and its stakeholders? So Mike, you bring up M&A, a great example. Let's think about enterprises first and maybe marketing, maybe software vendors. What are some of the implications? Jarron, what do you think in your view? What do you think is going to result from this?
So Bryan, I'm actually going to follow on from what Mike just said in that in this sort of marketplace, each of the vendors and each of the third parties are responsible for maintaining and upgrading their integrations to the middleware. Right. And so in the past, it was really one company responsible for their data out and also the data into the integrator via the API. Now the responsibility is split. And the middleware is essentially just transitioning the flow of information. And so I think this is going to add a lot of agility and onus and responsibility on each of these parties. And I think that's healthy in the marketplace,
Yes.
because we're all working together as vendors, as partners, and we're all activating and standing up the data for mutual customers. And so naturally, you have to each own those journeys. Before, it was, here's my API, go and do what you need to do. But now, if we're forcing each of these vendors to maintain and upgrade these middleware applications, then we're really splitting the load and making sure that we have the easier kind of ecosystem now to activate these integrations.
Yeah. So, Amie, given what Jarron was talking about as some of the implications of responsibility on both sides of the equation he was describing, and then now having middleware and how that kind of changes the dynamic, what are your thoughts on that?
I think as an operator, where it changes things for me, for us, is having the right people and the right skill set in place. So, like I mentioned, we're using Middle by Perkville, and I consider it a low code tool. So I don't have to have an engineer that uses that tool to build the necessary integrations, but you need somebody with enough technical acumen and an understanding of the data and its structures to be able to use it. And so it's changed a little bit about what are the type of people that I need on the team. And I see that continuing to evolve as we have more low code tools come onto the market. It's the people part of the equation is so critical and something that really needs due consideration when we're evaluating what are the right tools for our problems, and making sure that we have the right people in place to be able to use them.
Yeah, it's being able to allocate resources better and more appropriately, right? Without getting stuck in the mud of all the technical aspects of what you're trying to accomplish, which is just challenging, right?
Yes, and I've been advocating for some time about democratizing the technology, trying to get more business users into the tools to relieve bottlenecks, to make it easier and faster for everybody to do their jobs. It's much more easily said than done in my experience.
That's right. And does this, when we talk about the implications, Mike, and trying to be sensitive here, so when we're thinking about this, because, right, so there's legacy systems, right? And then there is the burden of innovating and changing those legacy systems to really support the business needing to do what it does. And there are some parties that are going to be interested in maintaining the status quo, and others that are not so interested in without getting into too much, without being insensitive. Do you see a dynamic of more innovation as a result? What are your comments and thoughts on this?
I feel like this is a continuation of our last conversation, so I will tread lightly. But one thing I'm seeing immediately is, obviously they're really smart folks now, right? We got into a little bit of the financial dynamics of the market over the last 5 years. And so MMS companies are out of their growth phase, and most of them have been gobbled up by VC, right? And so these VC folks, there's only a 5-year horizon left to get their 10x, right? So they're all looking for ways to make money. And as these integration layers are expanding the API economy, we're starting to see API calls get more expensive. And so for us in particular, where we have to pass on those expenses to our clients, it's interesting in the context of like, okay, so we want to build these data products, or we want to build these marketing automations. How much are these particular automations going to actually cost that company?
Right.
And especially, I think one of the burdens of the fitness industry is there is an aversion to variable cost.
Correct.
And so, in a tech company, knowing that there's going to be ups and downs with regards to, costs for API calls, it's not that foreign, but in our industry it is. So I see some headwinds with regards to API call fees going up, and then how to accommodate that. And to Amy's point, what that requires is more sophistication on our side of getting developers that can really write good code, and get what they need, limiting the amount of calls. So it can't be as exploratory as we want to be, but it does add a lot of complexity that we don't necessarily, have at this stage right now. So.
And in the end, isn't it about just making tools that work better for the business and the most effective way of actually achieving that, right? Jarron, I mean, is that really the end game in your view, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that is the end game. We want to simplify the process for customers overall. But in also watching what's happening in the marketplace with all this private equity money coming in, the consolidation of vendors in the marketplace, most of these now conglomerate groups want to keep the business within their ecosystem. So they're also not necessarily as interested in opening up their API to a marketplace that can then route that data anywhere to any other third-party application. So I think the benefits are clearly there in terms of allowing customers with a low-code solution to be able to do that. Now it's up to the MMS systems as a true source of record, because really that's where it all begins, to really put the customer first. Hence why we're opening up into the middle environment so that our customers can go and take their data anywhere. We don't want to hold their data ransom through this process, but it does mean that basically we don't necessarily know where they're moving their data to either. And that's part of the equation that the MMS systems have to adopt to make sure that this is going to scale effectively.
Yes, and that's an important, I think the last comment you made is an important dynamic where it's really up to the client user to do what they need to do. And you don't really have to be concerned about letting people know anything else. With respect to marketing agencies, Amie, because you head up digital and marketing in 24, what do you see the benefits from a marketing services perspective with this? Is it the single kind of source of truth on data for marketing support? What dynamics do you see there?
So we're, going back to Mike's comments about the API limits, right? That's a problem that we've run into, and where it goes back to my comment about not a one size fits all solution. And so we've run into those API rate limits, and in some cases where we want to share a lot of data, for example, with our performance marketing partner, Snowflake Share it has worked out to be the right solution there. So I think integration is just a really big topic with lots of ways to solve the problem, and it needs to be very use case driven. So as we look at trying to optimize our performance marketing, sharing that data is critically important to delivering the right ad through the right channel to the right person. So integrating our customer data is critical. In that case, APIs are not going to be the right solution, and so we're looking at Snowflake Share for that purpose.
Makes sense. Any other comments in general for you guys and gals about integrations and their impact to the fitness space at all, other than what we discussed?
So I take a more positive slant since I provided the negative purview. We've always talked about the customer journey, and I think to some degree we've been limited because we have, had to piecemeal our technology together. So often we'll either just talk about the top of the funnel or we'll talk about the experience within the club. And so one of the big positives of having better middleware is that we really can, I know it's a terrible metaphor, but cradle to grave the customer journey and have really rich longitudinal data with regards to how to make better business decisions. I mean, we used to have a lot of conjecture about doing that before, and now we're able to do it at a level of sophistication that any other enterprise group can do. So that part of it's really fun.
Yeah, and you have to have that to do the things Amie was describing. Hyper personalization, the right stuff at the right time, understanding where your opportunities are at certain points to improve lifetime value of customer, all these things that have a direct bearing to the bottom line of the business. It's intelligence, right? It's just knowing what is really happening and why. That's ideally where we all want to be, right? Yep. And it's not easy, and there are a lot of operators out there that have scale that this is a struggle. Like this is a hard thing to get to, but if you get there, you're really going to be way better off and ahead of your competitors, right?
Yep, absolutely. And then I think you get, not to get into the weeds, but you can move past vanity metrics. A lot of the times, I know Bryan, you and I have talked about this at length, that oftentimes because you don't have a big tech team, you're just going to prescribe to the KPIs that the vendor tells you are important. And this gives you that level of going, are these KPIs important? Let me build my own KPIs, based on my own business objectives. And so it lets you reverse engineer, what's important to your organization rather than being prescribed it.
Yeah, actually what's going on, I know in the ad space and marketing, conversion and attribution. I mean, there's all these things. We won't get in the weeds, but I know Amie and all of you understand these things where you really better know what you're talking about with more detail to know that in fact you should do X, Y, and Z, and here's going to be the result. That's the ideal world. So what are the various, Amie, you mentioned one in Snowflake. What are some of the various integration platforms as a service tools that you've heard being used in fitness, and are there any differences or any observations in general when it comes to tools in your experiences? Jarron, you want to start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most commercialized of the tools, and it was almost first to market of its kind, was Zapier. And this is a massive marketplace of thousands of third-party applications. In the fitness industry, it's interesting because most of our the software players are in the B2B vertical of fitness, and so they're very nuanced. So they may not actually necessarily exist in the marketplace. You'd have to almost go to the vendor and make sure that they are there. If you're going to go to a Salesforce or a HubSpot, etc., they're all there. And it's a plug-and-play solution. It's a really easy user interface. It's definitely for your SMBs to your mid-markets. And I think just because of the ease of use and how quickly it is to stand it up, I'd say it's a completely no-code solution in that bucket. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have companies like Middle by Perkville that are in this middle ground, allowing a lot more deeper level of customization, a bit more of a control of the logic layer in the middle of the data flow. And from our perspective, it allows us to build the integration in a much more customized way than even the developer portal in Zapier, we find. And so we're actually coding in the platform, but then naturally our customers are in that low code environment once they're using it.
Yeah, those are great examples. Amie, any other tools? You mentioned Snowflake. Any other tools that you like or have any views on?
We're, as I mentioned, we have some do-it-yourself solutions in place that I won't go into. We're also customers of Perkville using Middle. I think the journey orchestration piece of Adobe Journey Optimizer has real potential, as you were discussing, Bryan, around building multi-channel, rules-based, real-time, personalized communications. I think it's very exciting.
Yep.
And it's built on Adobe Experience Platform, the CDP. And so another component for us is getting to customer resolution. So all of these pieces come into play as we're trying to build the best customer experience as we can for our 24-hour fitness members.
Thank you, Amie. And Mike, saving you for last, what do you want to comment on? What tools do you like?
Yeah, so they've been mentioned. The only one that's sort of coming fast and furious is a company called Pabbly, because they have a lifetime deal right now. So I actually bought it personally just because I'm a tech geek and I want to play with it. We're loving Middle, and for our data warehouse, we're playing with BigQuery right now. So those are the tools of my trade.
Yeah. Listen, I think this is a fascinating topic, and I know that you all are all kind of on the cutting edge of what this is that we've been discussing for the last half hour. And I know a lot of people are wrestling with these challenges. How do we get things to work together better to make us, help us operate our businesses the way we need to operate them? So I think this is quite timely, and I know that the audience will really enjoy these specific examples and really get their head around why this is so important in the coming months and years ahead to be able to be effective in operating a business in this space. So I really want to thank you all for being here and making time. I know how busy your schedules are, and we had to work around people's schedules the last few weeks to do it. But I want to thank you both, all three of you, for making your views known, and I think this will be very helpful to the community at large. So thank you all for doing that.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Brian.
Hello, listeners. This is Bryan O'Rourke, and thanks so much for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. The podcast is made possible by the Fitness Industry Technology Council, a consortium of global brands working together to enhance the adoption of technologies in the fitness space. Our company, Vanity Ventures, which is invested in Vertimax, Montezuma, Gold's Gym, Houston, Texas, and Fitness 24/7 Thailand, also underwrites the podcast, along with our service companies, Integris Advisors, Moon Mission Media, and others. Please feel free to share this podcast with your colleagues. And if I can be of any assistance to you, don't hesitate to reach out, bryanko'rourke@gmail.com, or find me on any of the major social networks. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.